Okay, in this video I want to review some of your triad upper structure options for rootless voicings in particular. So we've covered a lot of different types of voicings and voicing strategies, right? We've covered block chords where everything is essentially stacked in thirds or an inversion of that, right? We've covered drop two voicings where you take one of your block chord voicings and you drop down the second note from the top down an octave to create a more open voicing, right? We have talked about quartils, which are voicings that are stacked in fourths. We've talked about shell voicings all the way back at the beginning, which is just roots and thirds and sevens, right? And we've talked about the Lydian grip as a voicing possibility, which is kind of a variation on block chord voicings. Okay, so now let's talk about one of the other really big strategies or approaches to constructing jazz piano voicings. And that's what I call arranging style or arrangement style. And the reason is because it's pretty common for arranging for jazz ensembles, especially big bands, to follow this kind of a strategy. So these are often rootless voicings, which simply means exactly what it sounds like. You don't need to play the root in the piano voicing because it's assumed that the bass player is going to cover the root for you. So that frees you up to play more notes that are on the upper structure of the chord. So with this strategy, I divide the keyboard up into three zones. Okay, so there's the bass zone, which you can play if it's possible, but you don't have to, right? And then we've got our third and seventh zone, which just like with all of our voicings so far, is right in here. Both your thirds and your sevens should stay within this range for pretty much every piano voicing you ever play, right? So you should never have a third or seventh that goes below the C, below middle C, and you should never have one that goes above the G above middle C, right? Because for the thirds and sevens to be heard as functional, they need to be in this range. If they go lower than this, they start to sound too much like bass notes and interfere with the perceiving the bass note as its proper function. And if it goes higher than this, they start to sound like upper structures and interfere with upper structure notes. Okay, so we've got our bass range, which is basically below here, below the C, below middle C. We've got our third and seven range, which is within here. And then wherever your thirds and sevens land, on top of that is our upper structures. Okay, so you can play the bass note if possible, but you don't need to. So this strategy, what we do is we basically just play the third and the seven in the left hand, and then we're going to put an upper structure on top. And the upper structures that tend to sound the best are triads, and especially major triads. Why? Because major triads are so common in Western music that they jump out to the ear. They sound very consonant, very clear, and very recognizable, even to people who know nothing about music and music theory. This is such a common sound, right? No matter what inversion it's in. Okay, so let's look at our possibilities for voicing this way. Let's look at for our basic types of chords, right? Minor 7, dominant 7, and major 7, just like for a 2-5-1. So let's look at D, keep it simple, let's look at D minor 7, right? So if I'm doing D minor 7, I'm gonna assume that the bass player is playing a D down here. So I don't need to play that D. All I need to do is my third and my 7, right? Which I could do here or here even. It's getting a little low here though, so I'll stick to here. Okay, so now I'm gonna think, well, what are some major triads that fit in this? Well, the obvious one's a little boring, but it works, is F major triad, right? Right? So I could voice that up here. Right? And remember, there's a D happening underneath this to contextualize it. Right? So it's a little boring because I don't have any extensions, but this works, right? So notice I've got my third and my 7 here, and I've got a triad up here. And I could voice these like this, with the third and the 7, and do a full triad, or I can double up where my third and my 7, one of them is functioning as part of the triad as well, which I'm doing here. Right? Pretty similar to a drop 2, right? Except I'm not on the E. Triad. So for a minor chord, you can do a triad from the flat 3, right? You can also try a triad from the flat 7, which would be C in this case, right? which makes it more of a minor 11 sound, right? Almost modal, but not quite, because I still don't have the 13, the B. I would not want to add the 13 if this is part of a 2-5-1, right? Because part of the 2-5-1 is we have to hear this C, right? The flat 7 on the 2 chord, voice lead to this B, the 3rd on the 5 chord. So I don't want to include this already in the D chord because it's going to muddle up my voice leading. But that's only if it's part of a 2-5-1. Okay, so if it's modal, like So What, for example, we can do the triad built from the 4th, right? Right, so here I'm doing root, 3rd, 7, and a G triad. Or in the So What version, right, it's a quartal on bottom plus G major triad on top. Right, but that only works because that's modal. That D minor is not functioning as a 2 and a 2-5-1, so that B doesn't bother us. But if it is functional, if it is part of a 2-5-1, well then we either have to do F major, right? So major triad from the flat 3, or C major, right? And again, you don't need to play the root, but I'm doing it just so you can really see here, right? So I've got C major triad. Happens to be in first inversion, but it doesn't matter. It can be in any inversion. On top of my 3rd and my 7 for a D minor. Okay, so now that would be an example for a 2 chord. So let's move this 2 chord into a 5 chord. 5 chords are where we have a lot of fun with triad upper structures. And they really only work if you alter the 5 chords. So these ones we're going to look at really only work for tonal 2-5-1s, right? Where the 5 is going 5-1. In which case, that frees us up to alter that, right? Okay, so if I'm on this 2, I'm going to go to my 5, which is my G7. And once again, the bass player is going to be playing the G, so I don't even need to play it. Right, so I just need my 3rd and my 7 here. 3rd and flat 7. There are tons of cool triad possibilities, okay? So, if you want a natural 13 and a flat 9, we can do E major. Very hip sounding, right? And let me plunk down a G and use the sustain pedal so we can hear this in context. Right, so you see that? G in the bass. Right, so I've got my 3rd, my flat 7. The 3rd is doubled up here, which is no problem because it's part of an upper structure triad, so that's why I'm doubling it. Right, and then we've got our natural 13 and our flat 9. Right, so... Here I'm resolving it to C major, right, with the 3rd and the 7, and a G major upper structure triad. So let's try and put all those 3 together just so you can hear an example of this in action. So I could do C major over the D minor, right? So 3rd and 7, D minor, C major. Now I'm going to go to my G7 with the E major triad on top, and then C with G major. So that would just be one example of an option. So let's go back to the 5 chord. So that's doing a major triad from the natural 6, right? Because remember, G is my bass note. Okay. I can also do major triad from the flat 6. This one's very common as well. Right? And now this changes my upper structure a bit though. So with this one, I'm forcing it to have a natural 13 and a flat 9. This one, I'm forcing it to have a flat 13 and a sharp 9. So very hip. And I'm not bothered about doubling the root here because the root is functioning as part of this beautiful upper structure triad. So let's hear this with, once again, G in the bass. Pretty cool? Pretty cool sounding. I'll resolve it for you. So I'll resolve it once again to a G major triad with my 3rd and my 7 for the C major. Right, so if I'm doing all triads, right, here would be my D major again with C on top, C major, sorry, D minor 7 with C major on top. Okay, G major, or sorry, G dominant with E flat major on top. And then C major with G major on top. Okay, but we're not done yet because we've got one more very hip option for the 5 chord, and that's from the tritone or from the flat 5, right? So we've already done, you can do a major triad from the natural 6 or the natural 13, right? Which gives you natural 13 flat 9. Okay, we can also do major triad from the flat 6 or the flat 13, which gives you a flat 13 sharp 9. And we can do major triad from the tritone above the root, right? Or the flat 5 or the sharp 4, however you want to think about it. And I'll do it in this inversion to avoid that little crunch. Right? So now I've got flat 9, sharp 11, and my flat 7 is doubled. But again, it doesn't bother me at all because it's functioning as a upper structure triad. So normally we try to avoid unnecessary doublings, but this is an exception, is when you're doing triad voicing. So let's hear how this one sounds. Pretty hip as well. Now you can even mix and match these. You'll hear Bill Evans sometimes literally play this over the G chord. He'll go. He'll play all 3. He'll jump around. Right? So you can kind of mix and match as long as you resolve it properly. Okay? So and then let's do the 1 chord, then we'll recap all of them. So as I've already suggested on the 1 major chord, right? G major triad. So the major triad from the perfect 5th works well. So here I'm doing 3rd and 7, right? And then G major in 2nd inversion over C. Right, that one works really well. Now also, if you want to give it a Lydian sound, which is very common in jazz, even for tonic chords, which is that major 7 sharp 11 sound, right? We can do a D major triad here. Sounds just gorgeous. Right, so I'm doing a major triad from the major 2nd or the natural 2, right? So D major on top of my 3rd and my 7 gives me a beautiful C major 7 add 13 sharp 11, which works great for a tonic chord. So now put all these together and you can create some really cool 2-5-1 voicings that have beautiful triad upper structures. So I could do the 2 chord. Let's do C major on top of the 2 chord. So major 7 from the flat 7. Okay, now I'll do major 7 from the flat 6 on the 5 chord. And then I'll do major 7, or major from the 2 on the 1 major 7 chord. Right, so on the D minor, I'm doing a C major triad on top of my 3rd and 7. On the G7, I'm going to do an E flat major triad on top of my 3rd and 7. And then on the C major, I'm going to do a G major triad on top of my C major 7. That's just one example. Okay, so that's looking at triad upper structures for 2-5-1s. We'll cap this video there, and I'll do another video where I review triad upper structures on other types of chords in other situations.